Alright everybody, hello and welcome back to another of our season previews as we build up to the launch of the Hyundai A-League season. We are joined today by a very special guest. She is one of the key members of the Ladies A-League Facebook, Twitter, what do you call it, a media conglomerate almost. She's a contributor to FTBL, she's a sideline reporter and commentator within Sydney radio circles, but most importantly she's an avid Western Sydney Wanderers fan and she's going to help us preview them today. Welcome Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for getting me on board.
That's alright. How was the introduction? I practiced it for a while.
Really good, really good. Well done. And
That's
let's see if you get my last name right.
Yeah, I was going to try and channel Lucy Zelich and go for it with the full accent and everything, but then I thought if I butcher it and you have to correct me, it starts it all off at a terrible level. I would have gone with Trajceska, is that right?
Nice try.
So Western Sydney obviously have one of the more interesting stories of the teams within the competition. Initially an expansion club, the FFA having to scramble with the failures of both North Queensland Fury and then Gold Coast licence being revoked due to their controversial owner Clive Palmer. Being an expansion club that was pretty much thrown together in about a 3-month period, what was it like for the local community in Western Sydney or in the Greater Sydney area to have representation? And what was it about that particular bid and project that had the community get around the team so quickly?
Well, it's definitely an ethnic-based area. Of course, we've got a mass population of, mostly from Southern Europe. We've got Italians, Macedonians, Greeks, of course, Serbians, Croatians, and so on. It's just such a huge ethnic base. We've got heaps of Middle Eastern immigrants as well, and just in general, that part of Western Sydney, we have the ethnic-based population as well as the passion for football, like it does in Europe. So we've brought that over from Europe and brought it to Western Sydney, and just having a club like the Western Sydney Wanderers to represent that area, it's automatically a win-win.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, and we hear it quite a bit, is that there's these Euro snob football supporters that just follow European football. And one of the big complaints that I think Sydney FC or the regular Sydney fans had with the expansion was that it was potentially going to cannibalise a lot of their own support base. And I'm sure there are people that did apply for. But I think what we found is that if you give teams in regional areas or, the Western Sydney region specifically, a team to support, you can bring a lot more of those European football snobs across because they have a team that they identify closer with than a Sydney FC side or East Sydney, depending on how you want to phrase and word it. And I think we see similar things down here as well. The expansion bids obviously going through the process at the moment, and that's a really interesting time. But being a Melbourne City fan down here, I know there was a heap of concern about Melbourne Victory's fan base being divided up, but in reality I think it does more to galvanise the teams that now have a cross-city rival. So do you think you saw a drop-off in Sydney FC's quality of fans, or was it more to do with their on-field performance really than anything that Western Sydney was doing in terms of the project?
Oh, there were heaps of fans that actually transitioned from Sydney FC to Western Sydney Wanderers. It's spoken about quite a bit over here. Also with relatives as well. I have a good handful of relatives down the coast who live in the Wollongong region who were Sydney FC fans. But now they sort of support the Western Sydney Wanderers because before they moved down to that part of New South Wales, they of course grew up and lived in Western Sydney. And they felt like they still had the identity of Western Sydney with them. So they just hopped on the Western Sydney train rather than the Sydney FC, not only because of course it's where they come from, but it just the club, the community club, the passion, the emotion that comes with it. They felt like they could sort of in a way feel more at home there than they did at Sydney FC. Not that Sydney FC was you put them into the box of a horrible team with they're amazing. They're the big brother of the Western Sydney Wanderers. They have class players. They've shown to and proven on the field and off the field how great they are. But it just, of course, depends on where you feel at home.
Yeah, and I think having that identification with the team does so much for the supporter base as well. I was involved with Melbourne Victory in the first few seasons of the A-League, and through various different experiences, I went to away trips, I went to away days, I went to home games as well. I just never really identified with them, so I never renewed a membership beyond that initial season. And then when Melbourne Heart initially came through and I kind of got involved with that project, I kind of liked that they were the scrappy underdog and that they didn't really have any facilities and were doing ice baths in the back of wheelie bins, and I really enjoyed their sort of Dutch influenced style of football. So just having that club that kind of resonated a lot more with me personally helped my support tremendously. And I think that's what came through quite a bit with pretty much from day one, the support of the Western Sydney Wanderers active support and the red and black block. It was so passionate and it was so different to anything that we'd seen in the league before, because these people that didn't necessarily identify with Sydney as much as previously now had their own outlet and their own team to get around. Tell me a little bit about your background with the team. When did you initially start following them? Was it from the first season? And what are some of your favourite memories for the men in red and black, and what made you fall in love with them as a club?
Oh, that's quite interesting. It's a really interesting story how I got into the red and black. I was a former Newcastle Jets fan.
Interesting. Look, you're not the first person that has actually changed teams. We and I think with the expansion bit as well, what keeps popping up is that there's people in these weird areas that would adopt other teams when they came into it. So, what made you make the leap across?
The reason I was a Newcastle Jets fan firstly is because I'm a Newcastle United fan for the Premier League, and I thought, Newcastle Jets, Newcastle United. At the same time, I've also got family up in Newcastle who follow the Jets. So at the time, I was like, I'm too young to make a decision for myself. Let's follow the group. But when the Wanderers finally came to the A-League, I thought, well, this is a place that I can finally call home. And not only does it represent the city that I'm from, it represents the passion that I have for football. So that European old football, as Lucius Ellich would put it, sort of feel and style and passion. And that's where I'm more felt at home. So as soon as they came on to the A-League and people were speaking about how it's going to be a community club and how the fans are going to get more involved, pick the crest, pick the colours, pick the city, pick the stadium. And I thought that was great. That's what a football club should be all about. So I got on board from then on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of like the fan engagement portion and what made it such a special project. Obviously, Melbourne Heart coming in 12 months beforehand, and North Queensland and Gold Coast prior to that, they weren't necessarily as fan engaged. They were, private consortiums owning that particular entity, trying to develop their own business model, their own branding, whatever else. I think the community integration has kind of set a platform for how FFA wants expansion teams to be run now. And I think quite a bit of what we're seeing now in terms of, new clubs being favoured as opposed to old NSL teams or, teams that already have their own regional cultural affiliations, is because they want to create their own branding from the ground up, with the people living in that region, with active support within the community, and that's how they want to continue to grow and develop each of the history of these clubs. And I think it shows as being a tremendous success that Western Sydney have been able to have such ardent support and such a passionate fan base and such a large membership figure because of the way the club was developed and because of the massive inputs that all of those people and all those key community members had in the establishment of the club.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that's the best thing about football, because, it started from the bottom. It started from dirt and dust, playing in the back streets. That's how it should, in a way, stay.
Absolutely. Maybe not, dust and backstreet. Do you remember the very first season of the A-League? There was like this weird, it was Scribe. He was like a New Zealand rapper, and there was basically all the marketing packages were these 30-second adverts of people playing street football. And then I think people actually rocked up to stadiums expecting to see street football. I don't know what it was about it. It just keeps coming up when we do these recaps, all the marketing that we've gone through, and that's one that just sticks with me all the time, that we've never had a street football competition for the A-League, and if I ever get the platform, I'll start it, and that's how I'll make my $1 million.
That street football just reminds me when I was a kid and we'd play the football out the front of the streets and end up kicking it under the cars.
Yep, having to get out of the way for cars when they were coming, move your little portable goals. It happened to the best of us. So obviously the other part is Western Sydney Wanderers, while they haven't had much domestic triumph yet to speak of, they have been the only Australian team to win the AFC Champions League in 2014. A phenomenal achievement given that so much of that competition takes place during the off-season. It's a credit to Tony Popovich, the work he did, and to all the players themselves that they were invested enough to really not have a pre-season and continue their season going for a full 18 months. How important was that victory for the team in terms of building their identity, and what did it mean to you as a supporter?
It was great. I was in high school, and it was so amazing. I went there. I went to Parramatta early morning, but we couldn't necessarily get there all the way because the car actually broke down. That was horrible. But that as a fan, that was just such a beautiful moment for me, especially for a club being so young and everybody saying that we weren't going to amount to much, we weren't going to get anywhere. We were seen as the scrappy little brother of Sydney FC, and then that's all we were going to do. We were going to play football and probably crumble. Everybody thought that the first season of the founding of the Western Sydney Wanderers, we weren't going to do very well either. Proved them wrong. It was just so great to, of course, come first, win the Premier Plate. Of course, we lost the grand final, but then to come back and win the ACL, it just proved to everybody in the A-League that threw us under the bus in the first couple seasons that we're not just here to, kick the ball around for 90 minutes and hope for the best and probably make it mid-table. We're here to win trophies. We're here to prove that we're better than that.
Yeah, and I think the buzzword that you used there was scrappy. If anything was going to sum up Western Sydney Wanderers' first few seasons in the A-League, they were just so resilient. It was a team that you really knew that you were going to have to scrape and claw to get anything out of. And part of that goes down to Tony Popovich, but also, the community support, the players that they put together. And I don't think anybody, even the most ardent Western Sydney fan, would say that at any time during that AFC Cup run, they played like sexy football and they were wiping teams off the park. It was very much like, we are more gritty, we are more determined, we are scrappier than you, and we're going to beat you in this particular engagement or fight or whatever you want to call it. And I think it did a tremendous amount to reflect the community and that area, just the way that they went about that win.
Oh, it was crazy. It was so beautiful to see that, the underdogs had come up on top. Not only the underdogs on the field, but you saw the fan base. Everybody has seen videos of Parramatta Square in front of Town Hall, how everybody went nuts. I wish the car didn't break down and I was there. But
at least you've got your own story.
Oh, yeah.
You've got your own personalised memory. There were thousands of people that were either in the stadium or at Parramatta, but you were doing something completely different and very special. And now you're getting to tell people about it on a podcast.
Yeah, it is a beautiful individual story, and I will hold it close to my heart, but still, I wish I was there. Just the atmosphere is just so beautiful to see how successful football had gotten in West Sydney in such a short amount of time.
And also, just for Australian football as a whole, to prove that there is a pathway for us to compete on that level, and there is a model that can be used there to compete on a continental stage. We always quite often hear about the money that's involved in China, the lucrative contracts that players can get in Japan and Korea, but to at least show that in terms of determination and wanting it and desire, we can compete with the largest teams in those competitions and some of the cashed up oil nations as well. So just in terms of Australian football and providing that pathway, we know we can do it. So now we have to set ourselves the standard of doing it on a more regular basis, which we haven't been able to achieve since. Yeah,
definitely. I do have a gut feeling that this I think it's Sydney FC and Newcastle Jets that are going up against them this season. No, it's Melbourne Victory and Newcastle Jets. I'm still half asleep.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, so you've got the Jets and Victory going up in this season for the ACL, and I think they're going to do tremendously well. Just looking at the squad for both Melbourne Victory and Newcastle Jets, I have that feeling that we're going to make it a lot further than we have in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go through season expectations and predictions for the league and everything. And also, don't stress about being half asleep. One of the long-running jokes I think that's now coming through is that I keep saying, don't worry, I'll go back and edit that out, and then I'll completely forget to do it. And I've made myself look like an idiot 15 times by doing exactly that. So I'll go back and take whatever bits out you want me to. But also, I might forget, and it'll be out there, and you just have to deal with that too.
Or you can just do it completely raw, and people can see what kind of idiot I am. That's fine.
People want real. They want gritty. Anybody could get these highly produced, fantastic content from Fox Sports or somewhere like that. We're on the streets. We're living the life.
Yeah, the truth is, we work a day job and we don't sleep. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did kind of touch on it. The FFA initially owned and ran Western Sydney. They are now owned by a consortium headed by Australian businessman Paul Lederer. We have seen different ownership groups, particularly foreign ownership groups, have different measures of success within the A-League itself. How important do you think it is for Western Sydney to have a local-based consortium, people that are familiar with the area, and how do you rate Paul Lederer and the current ownership group in terms of the work that they're doing?
I rate him very highly. He's done very well for the Wanderers. Even though we've had a couple seasons where we've struggled, I still have a lot of respect for him and hope in him. I don't want to go overseas. I'd rather stay local based, and the reason for that is simply because the Wanderers are a community team. You got to keep a community because they know the passion of the fans. They know where we come from. They know how we feel during a win or a loss, or when we're signing other players and what type of players we want and what we expect from them. They understand more if it's community based, so I'd rather keep somebody in from Sydney or Australia in general. I'd rather not go overseas because it'll cause more of a stir between the fans and the owner.
Yeah, and it just seems to take time. We've seen with Brisbane, with the Bakery Group coming in, they didn't quite understand. I think they came in with a very business type mentality, having owned other sporting organisations that benefited from that. But they didn't really understand like the community integration or the infrastructure investment. Whereas on the flip side of that coin, foreign ownership for Newcastle Jets, I think one of their biggest credits for the Ledman Group is that they've consistently tried to sign Newcastle talent, they've signed Newcastle sponsors, they've tried to get out there actively in the community to bring them on board, and I think they're seeing a lot of benefits of that. So by keeping it with the local base, and particularly a Western Sydney base, they already understand that community. There's no grading in period. They know the wants and the needs of the club. We'll talk about it a little bit further down, but the work that they're doing with the stadium is phenomenal and really needs to be applied a lot more to other clubs in the league itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll go through that further because I've got another point down here and I think it kind of buys into both. Looking at their last 5 league positions, in the 13-14 season, they finished as runners-up, second in the league. In 14-15, that famous Popovich season when they toughed it out with him, they finished 9th.
Yeah.
He immediately rewarded that with a 15-16 finish of second again. 16-17 they finished in 6th spot, and last year they finished 7th in the league. So you can kind of see a bit of yeah, there's kind of a yo-yo effect going on there, where there's a really good season and a really like high challenging season, and then kind of dropping off a little bit after that. I think Western Sydney are at a point now where they'll consistently be in and around finals conversation because the league's just moving in that direction. But what do you think some of the reasoning is behind the changes of fortunes year to year?
I think sometimes it just takes too long for us to start moulding together. We've seen in the season, of course, the first season went very well. Everybody went very well together. That was a great team. I can only pray for a team like that again to mold together so well so fast. But in the second season, of course, we lost a bunch of those players and we had to get used to a new set of players and a team and try and get everybody working together. And then, of course, in the third season, it worked out again. Fourth season went back down.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that keeps popping up is that when you are successful, unless you're a really big club like a Victory or a Sydney FC, and I guess to a certain extent a City as well, unless you're a really big club, if you have successful years in a salary cap league, other teams will start trying to, poach your talent essentially, or sign them at the end of their contracts or whatever else. So even though they've only been in the league a lot less seasons than most of the other clubs, they still have a relatively high turnover rate each season. There has been consistency in this last off-season, and we'll go through some of the players that they've lost and brought in further down in the episode, but certainly one of the continued struggles that we've seen is that there's so much player churn that it just leads to a lot of seasons where a team does really, really well, gets kind of torn apart a little bit in the transfer market, or doesn't adapt and change enough, and then really struggles the season after. So it's not unique to Western Sydney, but it's certainly an improvement that I think the entire league needs to make. And in a future episode, and I'm more than happy to have you on, I think we'll talk about the salary cap structure and both the positives and negatives for the league. And perhaps it is one of those things that if it was removed, you can offer longer term deals to some of your key players, and we start seeing more players sticking with teams for, like 7, 8, 9, 10 years of their career, rather than now, where in reality you've got a player for 2 or 3 seasons before they likely move on to an international side or to another team within the division.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely one of our downfalls here. We keep a player for like 1 or 2 seasons, then of course they leave, you bring someone else in. Sometimes it's the manager, like we did with Joseph Gombau. I'm not saying that he was a horrible manager to us. He has got his positives and negatives, but we saw that he just wasn't the manager for the Western Sydney Wanderers. That's another thing. It depends on the players you get. It also depends on the manager that you get, because not everybody can sort of manage or play for a team the same way that they have in the past. It is a different team to other A-League teams.
Yeah, we'll talk about Marcus Babbel in a moment, but I think also for the club, and one of the lessons that perhaps supporters need to be more open to, is that you can't just do the same thing year after year after year. Sometimes you do need new management and new ideas, but it takes the club and the players getting on board with that to really make it work. Like, there's no team out there, even at the top echelons of football, that doesn't try and change something year on year. It doesn't try and do something a little bit differently. The overall structure may remain the same, but you have to be constantly trying to evolve, and some of that does come from coaching changes. Gombau obviously is Gombau, so that's a whole other conversation. I'm sure we could fill an entire podcast on his credibility and his time at Western Sydney. But yeah, certainly you would hope that the resistance that he received, obviously the Popovich era was fantastic for the club. He's a tremendous manager, but you would like to think that Marcus Babbel will probably receive a little bit more fan support and time to integrate his own philosophies with the team than perhaps was afforded to Josip Gombia.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Definitely.
So what I wanted you to pick out, what was your season highlight from the 17-18 season? Obviously disappointing to not necessarily be involved where most expect Western Sydney Wanderers to be at the top of the table, but what was your personal highlight?
You sent me these questions 2 days ago, and it's taken me 2 days to figure it out. That means this season sucked.
No, that's all right. I know it's tough because, like, sometimes it's just an individual player, like the emergence of someone. Sometimes it's just one result throughout the course of the season. And I was a Melbourne Heart fan for a long time, so I knew that we were going to get one scrappy Christmas 1-0 win over Victory, and we were going to lose the other 26 games of the season. But I knew I had that one coming. So yeah, it can be tough at times. But if there's anything that you think was a shining light, by all means.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say the first derby at the beginning of the season because the Wanderers played so beautifully against Sydney FC. It was just a whole new breath of fresh air, as well as seeing Onyemake Oriera. The way that he played during that game, that's what I was expecting the team to go like for the rest of the season. Of course, it was short-lived because the second 45 minutes we sort of gave up. That's a pattern with the Wanderers, but that was definitely the highlight of the season. First game, beautiful play in the first 45 minutes, and we really showed Sydney FC what we could have done the rest of the season and what we're made of.
Yeah, definitely. I think early on in the season, like everyone starts on that level platform where, you know, anything could happen, and you showed enough in that 45 minutes that it could have been something special. It's just a shame that the team didn't really kick on and take it through for that entire game or really take that same application to the remaining fixtures in the season. But yeah, not a bad shout. It was a pretty pulsating early start to the A-League season last year. And fingers crossed, we're in for a similar treat in the next couple of weeks once the Sydney Derby kicks off again. So now, by the same token, we've got to flip to the other side of the coin, and you've got to try and work down what I'm sure is many frustrations from the 17-18 season. But if you're going to pick your greatest frustration from last year and the biggest area you think needs to be improved this season, what would that be?
Greatest frustration was definitely the appointment of Josip Gombel as manager. The first couple rounds of course, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Every manager needs some time to meld with the team, get his points across, see how we're going to work out the rest of the season. But that was definitely the biggest frustration for me because it didn't work out the way that we wanted to, and nor as fast as we wanted it to. And of course, it failed. So this season, we've got a new manager, and I quite like Mark Swavel's mentality, his strength, and the way that he speaks to the players, and the way that he's so well spoken. Like, you have faith in him. Everything that he says that comes out of his mouth is just like, okay, good. I'm going to stick by it. I'm going to see what happens. Even if it fails, the guy knows what he's doing. Just give him time.
Yeah, and we see it with Marco Kurz as well. There's that very frank honesty that comes with German managers. Where there is no bluff and double bluff. There's no Graham Arnold style mind games. They just come out and say exactly what happens to be on their mind and exactly how they think their team's performing at the time. And I think for a lot of people, that honesty isn't something that we see that often in the Australian sporting landscape.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what I love about it. Because the other day he was actually speaking about the players and how we went up against Sydney FC for, of course, the semi-finals of the FFA Cup, and he said that, you know, we went straight to the point. Like, we sucked. We didn't do very well. But we're going to come back from it. Rather than what I've heard in the past, oh, we played good football, but good football doesn't always get the results.
Yeah, exactly. And given that you only have 27 games to secure your season, you don't really get a dozen games like you would in a European season or like you would throughout a higher quality pre-season. That you're potentially going to get during the course of the A-League year. You can't really waste too many of those opportunities at 3 points. And I think that kind of came back to bite him a little bit as well. It took too long to integrate some of the basic ideas that he was looking to apply.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at the FFA Cup results and the pre-season results as well, not a horrible run in the FFA Cup. I was actually at the quarter-final game against Melbourne City, which you managed to win 2-1 from one very well-worked counter-attack and one very well-worked set-piece. But unfortunately, a semi-final 3-0 loss to Sydney FC, who are obviously very, very good. What were your thoughts on the semi-final game?
We fell apart. We completely fell apart. Sydney FC, they had it easy in the FFA Cup rounds. They got a couple of teams that were actually quite easy to go up against. Not that the other teams, of course, aren't great teams outside of the FFA Cup, but just it's Sydney FC. We already know how great they are, and they've proven it in 2 seasons in the past.
Yeah, and also it's a Sydney FC team in flux at the moment. Like they've lost some good players, they've brought some quality in as well. A new manager as well coming into it. It really would have been a good opportunity to kind of set a standard and go out there and kind of reclaim some of the glory or some of the bragging rights within that city. Within Sydney for the season ahead. It would have been a massive marker to set down for the rest of the teams in the league. What do you think was the difference between the two sides? Was it just that individual quality between the likes of Adam Lafondra, who's obviously joined this season? Siem de Jong had a pretty fantastic game as well. Was that just the difference between the two sides?
No, I think it's just the mentality of the whole team put together. Marcus Babel already mentioned that a couple of days ago in a press conference that the Wanderers just don't have that winning mentality anymore. They're draining. They go for a great 45 minutes and then they sort of give it up in the second half. Whether we're winning or losing, if we're winning, we're too cocky and then we end up giving away a couple goals, end up drawing or losing. If we're losing, we end up just giving up. That's it in the story. We're not going to come back from this. But Sydney FC, they're the type of team that fight till the last whistle blows, and that's what I envy about them so well. They're so great on the field. They have amazing players, amazing skill, and that strong mentality to just continue, keep going, keep trying. And it worked out for them.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens when you win for a long time. Like you have faith in your own ability, you have faith in your teammates to actually get the result and find that goal. Like quite often if you haven't had a great season or you're not performing that well, you don't necessarily believe that you're going to find that goal or you're going to win that challenge or get that bounce of the ball. And the really good teams, like I've been a Manchester United supporter most of my life, the really great Fergie teams, you always felt like they had something in them to get them over the line. Like they didn't have to be at their best, they didn't have to set the world on fire, but they were always going to find something to get like a 1-0 victory. And Sydney FC's along a similar vein. They don't have to play at their best to beat a lot of teams in this division. It'll be interesting to see how things go with the squad turnover that they've had, but they still have that really impressive Australian core with the likes of Josh Brillante, Alex Wilkinson, whoever else you want to mention, that they just continually find a way to either stay in games long enough to find the result or to take things to another level when they need to. So yeah, it's a tough one, but certainly we've seen Western Sydney get to that level before. We've seen them have that resilience about them before. It's a different looking squad. It's a different styled squad now, but certainly I think it's what they'd be looking to get back to. In their other friendlies, against A-League opposition in particular, they have won 1 and they have now lost 3. I know I've only written 2 here, but they had another one in Shepparton during the last week. In that time, they are 1 goal for 7 goals conceded. They then also lost 4-1 to Melbourne City in Shepparton. Do you look at any of those results and see any flags for concern?
I do in a way, but looking at the game against City, it was mostly the youth squad that was actually selected for that game. So I'm not quite sure if I can put that too far into the box of they're struggling. Most of our first team squad wasn't even part of that squad. It was mainly a couple of the main team squad and Vedran and Jodovic coming back from a shoulder injury.
Yeah, and it was scheduled not long after the semi-final defeat for the FFA Cup. So it wasn't a full-strength side. But how much have you been able to see any of those games so far? And what do you think we can expect the Western Sydney Wanderers lineup and structure to look like this season?
There is call for concern, of course, because we haven't done very well in the preseason, as well as we have won this and got into this, of course, the semis of the FFA Cup, but just by a couple points or a close call and a close win, and that's not what you want for your club to be doing. Winning just by 1 point or winning just by, basically biting the bullet. I think if anything, we should be looking on our defence a little more. That's where we've always had a problem in the past on the defence. So that's one thing to look at. What's the other question you were?
I'm not particularly sure. I just kind of wing these things and we go from there. But I think one of the things that has come up is that it doesn't necessarily seem to be a correlation between preseason success and results and how the league actually starts. I feel like every year Wellington thumps someone and then struggles for the opening 5 rounds of the season. Melbourne City has had pre-seasons where we've won all of our games, including against A-League opposition, particularly in 2016 when we won the FA Cup. But then we were burnt out by November because we'd hit our straps way too early. We hadn't paced ourselves correctly for the season ahead. So the hope is that, they've rotated, they've worked on their systems, their structures, and Western Sydney will start the season in round 1, perhaps not at 100%, but by the time you get to round 10 all the way through to round 27, they're operating at, peak efficiency and they know their structures inside and out, and you go from there. So it's one of those tough things when you have a 12 to 15 week preseason, which we do have in the A-League, whereas in European countries it's, 4 weeks at best. There does seem to be constantly for each of the teams and season previews that we've done issues with a lot of different things like that.
Yeah, very true. It's only pre-season, of course, FA Cup as well. It doesn't really reflect the rest of the season, especially we're not just going up against A-League teams in the pre-season, we're going up against FTBL teams and we're going against youth teams as well. At the Wanderers launch, we're up against Wellington Phoenix. And that was basically a youth team as well, so it wasn't the whole first team. Of course, we're just rotating, seeing who we can add to the first half, who we can take off. I guess we're just going to have to see as the rounds progress for the A-League.
Yeah, definitely. So we might go through now the players that have left during the off-season. I'll just kind of touch on each of them briefly. Alvaro Sayudo has headed to Racing Santander, so he immediately gets a contract back in Spain. He was one of the marquees for last season. Did struggle with a couple of different injuries. He had a strange wrist injury that popped up throughout the course of the season. What were some of your favourite memories of him, and why do you think it didn't really work out for him for a second season in the league itself?
He did have some ups and downs, of course. He had some positives and negatives, but he wasn't one of the players that I really took much notice to. The main reason is because, of course, he was injured most of the time, and at the same time, he didn't have many of the moments that made me, of course, get up out of my seat and go, oh, wow, well done to him, do it again. The main players that I had my eye on, of course, was Oriol Riera and defender Lorente. They were both players that played so well throughout the season.
Yeah, we'll go through your crush on Oriol Riera a little bit when we get to the marquee section. Obviously, it was weird to see kind of the two sides of the coin with him being so successful last year. And I thought it was obvious that Sayuda had quality about him, but it's whether he's consistently delivering on that quality to give you, decent return on investment. He would have been on a good contract coming from La Liga wages, and I don't necessarily think you got value for money out of him last season, and that's probably why they've gone in a different direction this year. The next one's Jack Clisby. He has previously played for Perth Glory, Melbourne City, Western Sydney Wanderers as well, and now moving to Central Coast Mariners. Why do you think Jack struggled to break into the first team?
Again, another player who had great moments and didn't have so many great moments. He didn't necessarily get the right chances. Again, like Sequedo, it was so tough for him to finally not really meld with the team. He was such a good player with the back four, and he had, of course, a strong friendship with the squad. But it just, of course, those moments, you're not always going to get the moments that you're hoping for in football to be able to make the right moves, or he just couldn't time them right.
Yeah, and I think he was probably the victim of the consistency that Raul Lorente showed. It's always a bit of an unknown when you have an international player come in, particularly a defender, but he's obviously got quite a bit about him, and Jack Clisby being a very similar left-sided defensive player, just a tough one to get past because he was playing pretty much every week.
Exactly. So I do wish him all the best at Central Coast. He has got it in him to play very well. He is a good defender, but of course it just didn't work out that well for him at Western Sydney Wanderers as we hoped it would be.
Yeah, there's definitely tiers to it. There's young players that are quality that you'll likely see at a top four side. By that I kind of mean, the two Sydney teams, the two Melbourne teams will look to kind of get them. And then there's a tier that and this isn't supposed to be a criticism of their club, it's just a reality of where they are now, like Central Coast, where he'll probably find those opportunities a little bit more frequent than perhaps he would at one of the bigger teams. So fingers crossed it does work out for him. I don't mind him, but even when he was at City, we still had Ben Garuccio ahead of him. We had Nicholas Colazzo ahead of him. I don't think he's ever really had the opportunity to be a first choice starting left back. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out for him. The next one, Michael Thwaite, has headed to Gold Coast in the Queensland NPL. Obviously a fantastic defender during the height of his career. A bit older now, he is 36. What were your thoughts on his signing last season?
I really enjoyed watching play. He had, of course, everybody had their ups and downs last season, but he was one of the defenders that I had more of a liking to than, of course, other ones. Not only because of the way that he played, he just had that passion for the red and black that you wanted. I mean, of course, there's players where you want them to be signed because they're going to play good, and then there's players where you want them to be signed because they're passionate about football and they are what lift the team. So they're basically like an active support in the squad. And that's what I got from Michael Thwaite. He just had that passion for the team and wanted to keep going and had that mentality of trying to push the younger ones forward.
Yeah, and I think particularly players in his style, like that never really based their game around being quick or being the most elite athlete. Time does catch up with you a lot quickly, so to continue in the A-League up until the age of 35 is very impressive. Also, one of the low-key season highlights last year was his partnership with Robbie Cornthwaite, where the centre-backs had a combined height of 17 feet or something like that, which was kind of cool to see, but obviously not from a footballing perspective, just from something to giggle at. The other one, and this one I think is more surprising, Jonathan Aspero-Potamidis has headed to Central Coast. He played pretty much every game last season. What were your thoughts on him as a youngster coming through, still only being 21? And what's the feeling amongst the fans that he has left to go to Central Coast of all teams?
Really skilled defender. I applaud him for everything he's done for the Western Sydney Wanderers starting off there, and I am sad to see him go. I really am. He's done so well for us. He saved us a bunch of times, especially in the seasons where we struggled. He stepped up quite a lot, and I'm quite proud of him as a supporter of the club, but also as a reporter, to see how well he's done at such a young age. So touching base on him going to the Central Coast, it's still a good move. It's sad that he's been injured, but he's coming back from that injury, and I think once he gets back up to the fit state that he should be, he's going to shine very well at Central Coast, but still, I'm quite sad to see him go because he's a very valuable player.
Yeah, and it's come up in a few different ones, and people that have listened to all these season previews, I do apologise because you're probably rolling your eyes at the moment, but we keep talking about the Central Defensive Partnership and how in Australia we make really good stoppers, like, you know, the big physical defenders that step to the ball, and then those kind of classier sweepers like the Alex Wilkinsons, the Reece Williams, are a little bit harder to find in the league itself. And he was very much in that mould where, despite his age, he was willing to play the ball. He was willing to take it in and out of tight spaces if he needed to. So I thought it was super interesting to see him leaving. Obviously, his injury struggles don't help. But definitely someone that I perhaps would have thought Western Sydney would keep around and continue trying to develop to become a mainstay of their team for the next 5 to 6 years before probably getting a big money move to an Asian club or an international team, because he definitely had that quality about him. The one criticism you could only really give him is that he's never been part of a team that's won, but I don't think that's necessarily on him. So it'd be interesting to see, one, how his recovery goes, as he mentioned, and also how many opportunities he gets to perform at Central Coast. The next one, and this one's probably heartbreaking for quite a few people that are listening in from Western Sydney, Brendan Santalab has moved across to Perth to join Tony Popovich at the Glory.
Oh, my heart bleeds. It really does. Oh, that was a painful one for me. I remember speaking to him towards the end of the season, last season. I was like, you know, your contract's ending. What's going to happen? I know how much you love this club. And he just kept saying to me, you know, I love this club so much, but it's not up to me. It's up to the board, blah, 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 blah. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of changes happening in the club, especially after how hard the season was. So everybody was just unsure of what was going to happen. And I think it just got too much, and he thought, listen, I'm always being put on the bench. I can't take another season of the new manager using me as second best. I know I've got it in me. I am going towards retirement now. I still want to continue to play. And if Tony's giving me a lifeline, I'm going to go play because I still want to play. And I can understand where he's coming from doing that. Go for it. He's got so much in him more to give, and he deserves to play football as a starting 11 rather than a super sub. He's far more than a super sub. As much as it breaks my heart, I wish him all the best at Perth.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, and don't ever apologise for being passionate and like having your favourites, because that's exactly why this whole podcast came together, and he's obviously one of those players. Do you think he realistically has a chance of dethroning Andy Keogh or the likes of Chris Harold and be a starting player for Perth this season?
Yes, I really do think he does. He's got it in him to become the first.
Time will tell. I think he'll still be a substitute role, but he's just got that quality about him. He knows the league. He obviously keeps in tremendous shape, and it is a very physical league. He'll get you 10 goals every season. So a weird one to see, a Western Sydney side that is in flux and obviously has a high quality marquee striker at the moment, willing to release him. But obviously you understand the players' frustrations not getting the starting berth that they want, particularly that he is 35, 36 now, something like that. So he is in his last couple of seasons as a professional, and you can understand the decision as to why he's moved. An interesting one, Steven Lustic has headed to Inter Zaprezhec in, I think, I've not written it down, but I think it's in Croatia. He's an interesting prospect. He continues to yo-yo between European countries and teams within the A-League. He's also played at Brisbane and Adelaide as well. What are some of your thoughts on him as a player?
He's, like you said, he's yo-yo between Europe and Australia quite a bit. Now, that just proves that he has got skill in him. And he's also got the maturity of the way that European players play. And I think that's why people keep asking him to come back to Australia and play for teams in Australia. He's got that sort of mentality of Europe, as well as that able to hold on to pressure and use it well against other players. Because if we see in the A-League, a lot of the A-League players, how do I put this? They're a lot more, in a way, fast-paced and risky with their play. And of course, we saw that with the Wanderers, with Sydney FC at the FTBL Cup. We just kick the ball and hope for the best. And in a way, they panic under pressure.
Yeah, we build tremendous athletes, but we don't build the greatest technical footballers.
Yeah, that's the problem with the A-League. But over time, of course, it'll get there. But I think that's the thing with Steven Lustica. He's got that European mentality of trying to keep it calm on the field and letting it flow. That's why he keeps going between Europe and Australia. With the Wanderers, though, it didn't really work out for him the best way it should have. There were some times there that he did play well, and then there were some times basically a little more than the positives, a little more negatives. It just didn't work out for him at the Wanderers. So, of course, he just picked up and went back to Europe.
Yeah, and I think the emergence of Kieran Backus didn't help him either, and Keanu, obviously, as well. When you see players come through like that and perform well at that level and in those positions, it's tough to kind of break back into those teams. The next one, and this one from an impartial person looking in, is probably the biggest departure of last season. Chris Ikonomidis was initially on loan from Lazio. He has now signed on a full-time contract with Perth Glory. What were your thoughts on his time at the Wanderers, and what do you expect for him moving forward in the league?
For the short amount of time that he was at the Wanderers, he was, I'm going to have to say, close to magnificent. He played very well for us. Of course, at the time, he was, in a way, trying to impress for a spot on the national team for the FIFA World Cup. Of course, that didn't go very well. Honestly, wish he did. He would have played amazingly. But he did very well for the Wanderers for the short time that he was there. Impressive with his control for the ball. I expected a couple more goals from him last season, but of course it didn't happen. Very sad that he didn't get another contract. Another person that I've spoken to during the off-season, he said how much he enjoyed playing at the Wanderers and how if they do give him another contract, he's happy to come back to the Wanderers in the future. But another one that Perth gave a lifeline to, and he just took the opportunity, of course, and I don't blame him. Again, Tony Popovich has put a great side together at Perth, and if I was him, I'd want to be part of it too.
Yeah, definitely. This is me putting my nerd hat on, and anyone that thought I sounded kind of cool, it's going to go out the window. But each year when I play games like Football Manager, he's always a great person to bring in if you're doing an A-League series. So I've had him and known him closely through that game for quite a long time. This was really his first opportunity to get consistent first-team football for a club, and I think that's why he enjoyed the environment at Western Sydney. Obviously, a tremendous talent. He's been spoken about for years and years and years as this promising junior and this elite-level attacker in the Lazio youth system, and obviously he's had some loans within that club, within Europe, and now back to the A-League as well. If not for the emergence of Daniel Arzani, I think he would have been involved in the conversation for being that sort of Socceroos World Cup squad bolter. But again, he probably didn't perform, as you've noticed, consistently enough in terms of adding goals to his game. But if he does that, I don't see him staying in the A-League long. He's got all the technical attributes that we don't really develop that well in his game. If he can add goals to it or consistent assists, then I dare say he'll be heading back overseas relatively quickly. But fingers crossed for him, he does kick on and take his career to the next level.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I do see it happening, especially with him being part of a team like Perth Glory this season. They're definitely title contenders. And with him on the squad, they're going to do very well.
Okay, so we'll look at the contracts extended. Raul Lorente, we did speak about him briefly when talking about Jack Clisby, has signed on for another year. What did you make of the initial season from the Spanish left-back?
Very well. I rate him very highly. He's not only a great player on the field, but once again, he's another one of the Wanderer players that you want because he's got the passion for the squad. He said that he was going to leave at the end of the season. Of course, he extended the contract, and one of those reasons were he touched base on what he said last season when he first got signed. He doesn't want to leave until he wins something from this club. He's got that passion and drive, and of course, once again, that's what we need to, in a way, jumpstart this club again.
Definitely. The other one that's re-signed is Nicholas Sermon on a 2-year deal. Obviously a promising young player coming through. How important do you think it is to secure him on a multiple-year contract?
I think that's a very good. It's a very good move by the Wanderers to be extending the contract of such a young player, and he is a talented goalkeeper. And we need talented goalkeepers, especially in our league. We've got it basically covered in the W League. Jada Wyman is a brick wall, basically. And to see somebody like Sermon also signed for the male side, it's great. And I'm glad that they're producing goalkeepers of that standard. So hopefully in a couple more years he will be on the first team. So on, hopefully he gets to higher clubs. We're all aiming for Europe, and I hope he gets there. But he is a promising young player, and I'm glad that they did sign him. I'm glad that they're still training him and making sure that he's part of the squad, whether on youth level or even on the first team.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note that you put in there. We are doing our W League season preview next week, but obviously some great talent on both sides of the football programs coming through. And Western Sydney actually last year won the Youth League as well. So definitely making all the right moves in terms of a whole of football approach to success. And further down the track, a later episode this season, we'll talk about, like how do you measure success for a club? Is it just how the A-League side's performing? And when you kind of do a side-by-side comparison of all the teams and you compare the trophies across the A-League, W League and Youth League, it's really interesting to see which clubs are kind of still ahead and which clubs have kind of caught up because of their investment in W League and Youth League football, and certainly Western Sydney are making the right moves in that regard. So hopefully Nicholas Sermon is the first of many to come through that system. Now we get to talk about the exciting ones, the players that have come in. I'll loop these first three together. Obviously, they've all signed for Melbourne City, so I can give you a little bit on them as players. But Nick Fitzgerald, Bruce Kamau, and Ruan Tonjic, all of them had first-team opportunities. Some of them took them better than others. Nick Fitzgerald, I thought, for periods last year was absolutely fantastic and kind of a tough one to see him go. Bruce Kamau started the season in phenomenal form. He was brilliant in the first Melbourne derby of last season, and then I think got a double in round 2 against Brisbane. And then as people started to talk about him as being a potential Socceroos bolter, and even Warren Joyce came out and said if he continues at this rate, he'll be playing championship at the end of the year. He didn't really kick on to that next level. And Ruan Tonjic, I think, is just a victim of the emergence of, one, Michael Jakobsen, and two, Bart Schenkerveld coming into the league and doing so well. But what do you read on those three joining, and what are your expectations for them at the Wanderers this season?
I like all three signings, and I'm glad they have signed for the Wanderers. I think they're going to get a good chance throughout the season to prove a lot, especially Kamau. He's a class player. I've seen him play before. I've also seen of course, there's negatives to every player. He didn't have that much luck towards the end of the season, but I think joining the Wanderers, he said it himself, he's proud to be part of a club that has that sort of fighting passion, and I think with him, they're going to get it back. So I'm happy to see him. Nick Fitzgerald, I can definitely agree with you there. He is a class player, and I'm also excited to have him, and I know how sad you are to see players like that, like your favourite slave, but don't worry, we'll take good care of him.
Yeah, I can never complain because usually if they're getting rid of someone, it means that they have something set up already and we've done good business. But certainly, to see him go on a free, that's kind of the disappointing portion. There were periods last year where he would have been in people's teams of the league because he was just operating at a fantastic level. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it changes the structure a little bit this season for Western Sydney and how they're going to play. But a great signing for you guys.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to seeing all three of them play.
Yeah. And Ruan Tonic, he'll be an interesting one. He's 22 now, I think. He's got all the physical tools to be an elite level defender. He's quick, he's strong, he covers ground very well. It'll be entirely based on the partnership that he potentially forms. We will talk about one of the other players coming in who I think he'd be a great kind of foil for. But the next one we'll go to is Tarek Elrich, obviously returning to the club after being a foundation player. Had a decent few seasons at Adelaide United, including winning a title while he's there. He has struggled with injuries in his most recent seasons, but obviously a tremendously quality player, consistently highly rated by other professionals in the league, and like just the consistency that he offers throughout the course of a season is tremendous. So what's your thoughts on Elrich returning to Western Sydney?
I'm happy. I'm really happy to see him back. Like you said, he's been highly rated by many people all around the A-League, especially Adelaide United love and adore him like we do. He's just been great for both sides. Injury, of course, was the bad luck run for him. But I think coming back to Western Sydney, he has still got the support from Adelaide, and seeing him go, of course, it upset them, and I can understand completely. But coming back home, after all that injury and all that downfall, I think the motivation from the fans and knowing that he was a fan favourite and a foundation player, that's going to drive him to obviously achieve the best, not only for himself, but for the club.
Yeah, definitely. And decent platform for him to do that, given that environment and how well supported he'll be by the team there. The next one, really interesting one, mainly because he was involved in the kit release for Adelaide United, and he was all over their marketing and their branding. So I'm not entirely sure how quickly this deal came together, but Jordan O'Doherty comes across from Adelaide United.
Yeah, that actually went under the radar for me. I didn't really notice much about that one.
Yeah, so when we did our Adelaide United season preview with Thomas Joel, who has obviously been involved with Adelaide for quite a while, he spoke about the individual players and where they prefer to be playing. And apparently Jordan O'Doherty played a lot in a central role last season and did very well in what was a very injury-depleted Adelaide side. But he saw his development being further served in a wide position, like playing on a wing.
Yeah.
But then obviously with the signings of Craig Goodwin, Ben Halloran, he perhaps wasn't given the assurances that he was going to get to play in his preferred role and get to, showcase his skills. So I am curious if he has moved to Western Sydney with an implication that he expects to be playing more in a preferred position. So it'll be an interesting one to see how it goes. But obviously a good young player, he will be as part of the under-23 kind of, what are they called? Like specialised players within the cap at under 23, so they don't count as much of their wage towards the salary cap. But it'd be interesting to see how his development continues.
Yeah, he'd definitely be one to look out for, and at such a young age, but still with a lot of skill. It's going to be exciting to see what he can do.
Yeah, and it throws the E-League into disarray because his brother's actually the representative in the FIFA competition. Doesn't matter to anybody, but just a nice little side note that we can attach to that. Brotherly rivalry between the two clubs now. The other one that's joined, and he had a very good game in the FFA Cup against Melbourne City, Daniel Nizic, who joins from Lower League Morecambe in the UK.
Yeah, Nizic, he didn't have such the greatest start against Hellenic, but he has proved himself with each game that went by at the FFA Cup that he's got a lot in him. He would definitely be a first keeper over the next, let's say, another season or so. There was a lack of confidence at the FFA Cup, but I'm not going to talk too much about that because the whole squad was just falling apart. But Nizic in general, he's promising. He's a very promising keeper. He's quite damn tall. Like, I've walked past the guy a couple
He's
times.
a big boy, and he's not just a tall guy. You know how you see those people and they look like a scale model of a regular human being? Like, his head's quite big. His shoulders are broad. He's got massive hips. Like, he's just a next level of evolution type person. He's a very big unit.
He's crazy. For such a young keeper, it just proves in a couple more seasons, a lot more experience, a lot more training, he's going to become unstoppable because he looks already like a brick wall. Can you just imagine how he's going to look in a couple more seasons when he's got a little more experience on his back?
Yeah, we'll refer to him as the genetically blessed Daniel Nizic for the rest of the season.
Oh, yeah, that's it. He's done. That's his nickname.
Yeah. The next one, really interesting signing. He's a half German, half Australian passport holder. Oh, sorry, he holds both a German and Australian passport. He's joining from FC Kaiserslautern, who, while a massive team in Germany, have been playing in the lower divisions for the last few years, but he has been a key and critical part of that team. Patrick Ziegler, what are your thoughts on him as a signing and seeing someone that is still relatively young returning to the league, not just inside the cap, but also not taking up a visa spot?
Another player that I'm excited to see play. Since mainly because of the club that he's come from, but also to see another German. I can see that Marcus Pavel wants to bring in his Germans because, of course, he can mesh with them a lot easier. But German players in general are just class players. They're so great at what they do, and just to see him link up with this Western Sydney Wanderers side, I'm enjoying that the squad that has been put together. I think he's going to be another key player on the squad. It's just so great to see German players coming in because it's going to be so good to see that there's more than one German player, which means they're going to link up perfectly together. And I think the squad's also going to take note from, of course, the quality that he comes from and learn from him.
Yeah, and there's a long-running history in the league itself of having strong German imports. Go back to the very first scene of the A-League. Andre Gumpret was aboard the central midfielder that played for Central Coast, and I loved him. I was obsessed with him because he was just phenomenal. And then obviously Thomas Broch is in the conversation for the greatest A-League player of all time. There aren't that many German failures that come into this league, and I thought he was very good in the FA Cup. There's also seems to be like a correlation between the size of a guy's thighs and his ability within the league itself. You can always tell the players that have been involved in European football because they've got those real tree trunk legs when they come back into the league. And he definitely looks every inch a decent footballer. The other part is that during the course of the week on the Western Sydney social media channels, they released a video with him and another player who we'll talk about in a moment doing, like Australian slang and eating Australian foods and whatever else. And his enthusiasm for that segment and just like he's obviously excited to be involved in the league and to be regarded as being, kind of a big deal coming back from a European nation. If he continues to show that enthusiasm for the club and playing, the fans are going to absolutely adore him for the rest of the season.
Exactly. I think they already do. And like I said before, the more and more players that we get with that sort of mentality and that personality, it's going to make the team shine a lot more.
Definitely. So the other one we'll talk about, and he was a little bit of a sourpuss in that most recent video up on Western Sydney's social media channels, but obviously a tremendously quality player. Alexander Baumjohann, I've probably butchered that pronunciation, and if he's listening, he's more than welcome to come on and shout at me about it. He came through the Schalke youth system over in Germany, had tremendous raps on him for a very long time, but obviously his career's just never kind of hit that high level that was expected of him. His most recent club was Club Vitória over in Brazil, and he now makes his way to the A-League to try and recapture or make good on some of that potential that he had so early on in his career.
So yeah, looking at the Bundesliga clubs that he has come from, they're great sides, and like you said, he didn't have the best of luck with the clubs coming through, not too far away from the years that have passed. Now, again, another player, of course, some players don't have the best luck overseas and then they come to the A-League and they completely kill it. And we've seen that with Basar Russia. Coming from Europe, he didn't have the best of luck. He wasn't really selected very well. Coming in Brisbane, he basically killed it and then switched over to Melbourne Victory and became Victory's legend. And now it's sad to see him go. So I'm definitely going to see him as another player that has got the skill. Of course, it was a sour puss in the video, but, give him a bit of time and he'll probably crack a smile. He's another player to keep an eye out for because I do have a feeling that he's going to mesh very well with the squad, especially being another German, playing with German players and having a German manager. They all have this sort of same strength and mentality.
Yeah, the one flag that you have to watch out for, and he may, I call him a sourpuss, he may just have resting bitch face, and it's not his fault, and it's just who he is, and we shouldn't yell at him about it. But I think he'll need to play as a number 10. And if he's quality and he's consistently leading the team and really great in that position, it's fantastic to have. But in terms of tactical versatility, if you're constantly trying to carry that attacking midfielder that isn't necessarily doing defensive work, it can be difficult. So I think the partnership at the base of midfield, which looks at the moment like it'll be Keanu Bacchus and Rolly Bonavacia, who is one of my favourite players in the league, will be super critical to how he performs. But if he gets going, and like you mentioned, Besart Berisha, we spoke about Thomas Broch earlier, and he's one of these journeyman players that's been involved in a variety of different clubs over the last few years, settles and finds a home, I think he'll be fantastic for the league. But again, everything's on paper at the moment, so anything could still happen, but fingers crossed he's a quality addition and takes Western Sydney Wanderers back to the level that they should expect to be performing at.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the next one, and by all means, feel free to gush and fawn over Oriol Riera. He is on a marquee contract again, the second of 2 years. What are your thoughts on his first season in the league, and what do you expect from him leading the line this season?
He's the marquee that we've been waiting for. We haven't had much luck in our marquees in the last couple of years, as we've all seen.
I actually really enjoyed Pia Vicari.
Really?
Yeah, like no, he didn't score or anything, but he definitely had that quality about him. And for a guy that was about 5'6", he held the ball up and played as a target man really well. He was just lacking the goals, but I really enjoyed like his interplay and his build-up play and lead-up play. He just kind of needed to play in a flat 4-4-2 with a partner up front to run off the shoulder. But I actually didn't mind him, and I know I'm the minority. I accept that in that particular conversation.
I didn't mind him either, but at the same time, there were a couple times there where he got on my nerves. But yeah, apart from that, let's get back on to Oriole. Yeah, like I said, the season. Let's just turn off the sound for that. Sorry, you can edit that.
That's okay. It's all good.
The boss just telling me when my next shift is. All right, so back to Oriole. He had a great season last season. 25 appearances and 15 goals, I think it was. I don't think that was enough for him. He definitely could have scored more than he did. He is a class player, and I think he's going to pick up from last season and continue that. Maybe even do better this season, especially with the squad that we have together. I think he's going to get a lot of help from the midfield this season, bringing those balls in. Also on the wingers, we've got Rolly Bonavazia on the wing as well, and he's proven in the preseason that he's doing very well at the moment. So I think they're going to link up very well together.
Yeah, the interesting one is that, so I'm not sure if it's a criticism of him or the way the team was playing last year. If you give him half a chance, he'll probably finish it. He's just one of those players. So it's hard to say whether last year was him underperforming or maybe the squad not necessarily providing the service and the delivery that he required to kind of hit double figures and be involved in that golden boot conversation. But certainly some of the improvements that we made, particularly in wide areas, I think are well suited to his game. The likes of Nick Fitzgerald, Bruce Kamau, Jordan O'Doherty. If they can start getting crosses in the box and find that consistent delivery to him, then yeah, I think we could definitely expect to see an improved output in terms of goals from him this season.
Oh yeah, they're definitely going to mesh very well together, and we're going to see a lot more of Rolly Bonavazia this season than we did last season. But yeah, Oriole Rivera, he's doing great. I think he's going to be a contender for the Golden Boot this season if the Wanderers do step up from what they did in pre-season and start actually playing well together. Definitely going to be up for the running of the Golden Boot. Other than that, I'm quite impressed with him, and I'm also quite happy that he chose to actually stay with the Wanderers. Another one like Raul Llorente, who said, I'm not leaving until something happens with this club. I want to make sure that we're at the top before I even think about leaving. He let go of a 3-year deal back in Spain, close to home, where his family is, just to stay here and ensure that, he does his job and he does it right. And I respect him a lot for that.
Yeah, we are seeing more and more marquees and international players that are coming to the league, even when their time ends with their club, staying around. The likes of, like Thomas Sorensen, moved his whole family down here and he lives here now. And he's developing his own businesses and stuff in Melbourne. Enrique, when he was cut from Brisbane Roar, didn't leave, stayed and played NPL. Jonathan Germano, who was Melbourne Heart player, Argentine recruit, he stayed and plays at an NPL level around here. There's similar players around Sydney as well. It's really interesting to see that a lot of the internationals that are coming to the club, even when their A-League stints finish, are still wanting to stay and build lives and build families. And I think that's one of those kind of intangible things that we forget to talk about when we go through like the league and structure and some of the key marketing aspects or key selling points trying to bring out international players here. So good to see that both he and Lorente are enjoying the quality life over here and that they're comfortable bringing their families.
Yeah, it is good. It just, as much as there is downsides to the A-League and people are up in arms about expansion and the FFA, you're doing the right thing when your marquees want to stay.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that keeps coming up is like the overall quality of the league seems to be improving quite a bit. And even though they're not the most big name signings in terms of like bums on seats marquees that we hear about so often, the likes of Riera, Ross McCormack, Richie DeLayet, Matt Sporanovic going back to Perth, of players like that, of that ilk, that have representation and reputations in other areas of the world, if they come over here and have positive things to say about the league, you lead to getting more players aware of it, more players interested in coming over themselves. I'm sure we got Richie DeLay because last season Ross McCormack came over and had such a good experience. I'm sure we got the likes of Oriol Riera, and it will lead down the track to other La Liga players willing to make the direct transfer across, albeit under marquee deals. The more we can integrate these players into our footballing systems and structures and our way of life, the greater long-term success we'll see from our international players. We don't get as many failures. We don't get any Vitor Sabas anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the great thing about it. I'm glad it's going in that direction.
Absolutely. So the next one, and I thought this was an interesting one, Brendan Hamill's been appointed captain for the next season. What are your thoughts on the appointment and on Hamill as a player?
I like it. I'm glad that they picked him as captain because, of course, like he said in his own little personal interview that he did with the Wanderers, he is a Western boy, born and bred, and he's got the mentality that the Wanderers need. He didn't have the best couple seasons. I'm just going to say 3 seasons in general. A lot of people took stick at him. A lot of people made fun of him, said that he wasn't good enough for the first team. Why is Popovich continuing to give him a chance on the squad? Oh my God, he's given a ball away again, yada, yada, yada. He's picked up since then quite a lot. And I'll admit, for a bit there, I was quite upset with the way that he played as well. But he's proven to, of course, he's matured. And I'm glad to see that. I think that they've appointed a great captain. He's going to do well. Even though it was a shambles for the Sydney Derby FFA semi-final, he's going to take note of that. He's definitely going to try and fix that for the next Sydney Derby that he is not too far away. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm quite happy that he's the captain. I have faith in him. He's got it in him.
He is still only 25 as well, so if he's going to be around the club, you're going to get consistent leadership. The other intangible, and I know I keep bringing up these random things, but we don't really see day to day how people are on the training track and what his role is within like the social hierarchy and structure at Western Sydney. Like, there's obviously environments like that. While fans may only see the game every week, he may be a fantastic leader on the pitch. He may be a brilliant trainer and always takes intensity into sessions and things like that. It's those sort of things that we don't see in the day-to-day operations of a club that make a captain even more important than just what they do out there on the pitch. So I do think it's an interesting one. I think he'll learn a tremendous amount about how he needs to behave in the media, because I don't think some of his comments in the lead up to the FFA Cup semi-final particularly helped the team. I think they kind of increased pressure at a time when, you had kind of a clean slate. But I think he'll learn a tremendous amount from that, and hopefully he does, as you've suggested, kick on and find that consistency this season. His partnership with Patrick Ziga got them into a semi-final, so it couldn't be that horrible. And then also there's the likes of, we've already mentioned him, Ruin Tonjic coming through, a couple of youth and scholarship defenders coming through. So if he's going to be a leader and sort of a mentor to a lot of those players, there's worse people that they could be looking up to.
Definitely, it's gonna be a learning season for him. That's all I can say. But he's got it in here. I'm quite excited to see how he's going to do for the rest of the season. Of course, round 1 hasn't even kicked off yet, so only time will tell.
So there is another player that I want to speak about, and I apologise because I didn't put it in the run sheet, but he's almost like a new signing in a way, in that Josh Risdon had such a phenomenal season last year in an underperforming side, had a really fantastic World Cup. How important do you think it is for Western Sydney that they've been able to keep a hold of him this year and managed to kind of, I don't think there were any official bids, but there was definitely interest in the player from countries within Asia, international teams as well. How important it is that they've kept hold of him, and how do you think he'll react and respond to the fact that he hasn't gotten sort of that big money move that he potentially was being touted for?
Well, number one, he's a really good defender, and I'm glad they've held on to him for that. He's had a successful season last season, like you mentioned, and he did very well in the World Cup as well. I'm glad that they held on to him, not only because, like I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, we're struggling in our defence a whole heap. That's why I'm glad that they kept him. He knows what he's doing with the back four, which means he's really good at teamwork, but at the same time, he knows how to work on his own when, example, everyone else is falling apart. He can work independently, and that's the great thing about Josh Risdon.
Okay, so the next one, the current manager and staff, Marcus Babel has obviously joined the club. You say Babel? Is that how you're pronouncing it?
I go Babel.
Babel. That's a good one. See, I'm too keen to start using a variety of different puds around the word able. So it might just be my backward psychology working into it. But yeah, let's go with Babel. He's joined, obviously had a long career as a player, a German international, played at Liverpool for quite a long time. He's a Hertha Berlin legend. He made his transition to coaching in Germany. Interestingly enough, he has actually had senior coaching positions in Germany itself. So this isn't the case of a manager trying to get their first senior managerial appointment in a lower league structure. He's actually had relatively successful seasons in international leagues, so he does know what he's doing. What are your thoughts on him as a signing, and how important do you think it is for the A-League to get that kind of credibility and have that kind of scope in terms of its appointments for staff?
It's very important, and I'm glad that the Wanderers stepped up and took that signing, especially after the horror season that we had last season. It's definitely a step up from what we had. I like the way that, like we mentioned before earlier in the podcast, I like his mentality, the strength that he has, the way that he speaks, how he has no shame at all into speaking the truth. He's not afraid to tell the players when they're playing horribly, but at the same time, it's not really an insult to the player. It's a way of him saying, listen, this is what's going wrong, but you need to fix it. You need to get this right. I not only do I care about you as a manager, but I care about you as somebody that wants to help you get to Europe, because that was one of his intentions. He came to this club not only to make sure that the club ends up back on top to where they deserve to be, but also he's looking at the players, because majority of the squad are 25 and under. Some are older, of course, but for the younger players on the squad, he's saying to them, I'm going to bring whatever knowledge I have from Europe and Germany, and I'm going to install it into the Western Sydney Wanderers. The reason for that is not because I want to help just the club, but I want to help you as a young football player get to Europe. And that's what I'm so impressed about. He's not just here to win titles, win games. He's here to ensure that the Australian youth, the players of not just the Western Sydney Wanderers, but anybody to take note of this, of the way that he plays, and ensure that they install it into their brain and they take it to Europe if they get selected to go to Europe.
Yeah, and it continually comes up in the league, the lack of youth development and the clubs that are giving opportunities to young players. You can't really say anybody in the Sydney FC side or the Melbourne Victory side at the moment, with the exception of maybe Lee Broxham, came through that youth academy and those youth ranks. It's very much in those high pressure situations, in those kind of Hollywood clubs of the league, that they're going to bring in quality talent. And I guess that comes with the expectation of the fans and the board and whatever else. But to have a manager come in and outwardly sound out their commitment to developing young players while still trying to remain competitive is a massive credit to him. And I think it shows through in quite a few of the signings that they've made with the likes of Kamau, Tonjic, Nizic, O'Doherty. These are young players looking for first team opportunities. They're not, random 27-year-olds that have played for 5 clubs within the A-League, which I think is perhaps something the Wanderers could say they've been guilty of in the past, but all clubs could, where they look for experience within the league rather than, the next superstar.
Yeah, definitely. It's not only signing young players from other clubs. You've seen that he's also taken a bunch of the youth squad from the under-21s and put them on the first team as well.
Yeah, definitely. So the one to watch for the season ahead. Now, this doesn't have to be a breakout talent. This could just be who's going to be the star performer for the season. Who do you think is the one to watch for Western Sydney in the 18-19 season?
I think you already know my answer.
Yes, I do, but I'll let you say it anyway.
It's going to be Riera.
Yeah, the game and the competition needs more superstars, particularly superstar forwards, particularly with the losses of Berisha and Bobo last season. So I think Bruno Fornaroli has a chip on his shoulder that his A-League record was broken last season for goals in a year. And I think Oriol Riera similarly has increased expectations for himself and from the fans to kind of step up and become one of the elite level players. He definitely has the ability. He definitely has the quality. Like I saw it from the one opportunity he got against Melbourne City in the FA Cup. He took it with aplomb. If he can kick on and be like a 15-goal a season striker, he's going to be fantastic for the league. So fingers crossed, Christina, that your prediction is correct. On the flip side of the coin, who do you think is going to be the player that opposition teams will rock up and watch just so that they can boo him? Think of some of the great pantomime villains we've had, like the Berishas.
I'm not quite sure about that. Everyone's quite lovable over here. No, I think Sydney FC still hold a grudge against Vedran Janjetovic, so they're still going to be having a go at him. Especially with the ego that they have now after winning the semi-final round. They're in the next round for the derby. They're definitely going to be like, "Oh, welcome back. We're going to take you down again, just like we did for the semis."
Yeah, and an honourable mention from me to Jean-Paul Demariny, who joins as an assistant coach this year. His last act as a Melbourne Victory coaching staff member was to headbutt David Carney. So I think, one, that's going to endear him to Western Sydney fans quite a bit, and it's going to add another layer to the onion that is the Sydney derby when those two teams and sets of supporters clash.
Oh, definitely. When they both walk up onto the field, we'll have one on the sideline that they're doing and one behind the goal. So that's going to be quite exciting.
Yeah, it'll make for a pretty decent cauldron of atmosphere. All right, so now I'm going to put on my devil's advocate hat here and going to ask you some difficult questions for the season ahead, just so that I can get a fan's perspective on them. So please don't hate me for it. I'm just putting the words out there. The first one is that Marcus Babbel has proven experience as a player and as a coach, but he's not familiar with this league, with the style of players. They are probably a step down technically to what he's used to working with. How's he going to handle the adjustment period to the league? And do you think the Wanderers hierarchy, being, the board, the owners, and particularly the fans themselves, going to be patient enough to have another betting in period, given how they behaved last season in regards to Josip Gombau and the changes he tried to make?
It's definitely a step down from what he's used to, and of course it's going to take time once again, but I think it's going to take a little less time than it did last season, solely because I think Marcus Babbel knows what he's doing, and he's quite confident in his philosophy, and I think the players also have a lot of faith in him as well, so it might take time. I was talking to Nicholas Ruffalo from football the other day about this, and he asked me, how long do you think it's going to take until the Wanderers actually step up? And looking at last season, it took us all season basically to step up, and even at the end we had struggles. But for this season, I'm probably going to say around round 4 we're finally going to step it up, start moulding together very well, playing the sort of football that we're hoping to be playing and what Marcus has put down on pen to paper, and they're going to take it onto the field. The fans, from a fan perspective, it's going to be 50-50. There's still fans recovering from last season and how horrible it was. But there is also the other 50% of the fans who have faith in Marcus Babbel like I do and are willing to wait and be patient. But only time will tell once again. There's going to be a clash between the fan base, of course, at the beginning of every season. If it was a tough season prior, people are going to be, back and forth. Oh, we should wait. Oh, no, we shouldn't give him time. Oh, we should get rid of this player and maybe take this player in. There's going to be criticism from every angle. But I'd say about round 4 we'll be all right.
No, it's a decent shout, and I think the main comparison and line that Wanderers fans should draw is that Gombau came in very late in last season's preseason, and he had a playing group that he didn't put together, and I think this is a credit to the ownership group and the backroom staff on the board that they made their appointment early. Marcus Babbel got to manage his own transfer dealings. I think the only exceptions are Kamau and Tonjic, who obviously no one's going to frown upon. They are still young players developing. And he has been able to then bring in his own international players. He's been able to re-sign the key and critical players that he wanted to. So I think that helps quite a bit. The fact that he's also had a pre-season with the squad to work on the exact structures and shapes that he wants to play this season will help quite a bit. And as you've noted, I think the betting in period should be a lot less. But obviously, given everything that's happened in the last 12 to 18 months for the Wanderers, it is something that we'll have to continue to watch out for. Now, you did kind of touch on it with the fans as well. There is a line between passionate support, with Western Sydney and particularly the red and black bloc definitely have, and what we would call some of the more farcical fan support. There's a guy currently watching Manchester United videos and streaming his reactions, and he's an absolute tool and embarrassment to United fans everywhere. Arsenal Fan TV is another tremendous example. It doesn't necessarily represent all of the Arsenal fans in the world, but it certainly doesn't reflect positively on certain sections of them. Both the Wanderers office, and I'm referring to the addition of the star to the logo, and the fans, referring to when they rocked up at training in round 10 of last season, have kind of flirted with that line in the last 12 months. What are your thoughts on some of the Wanderers support, and where do you think that line needs to be drawn between passionate support and starting to kind of become a mockery?
Like I said, there's good and bad in everyone. There's of course, there's going to be 50% that ruin it for everybody, and then the other 50% who are there for real, want to support the club through thick and thin.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's closer to like 99% for most of the clubs in the league, but it's that 1% that, given that we are in an environment where media is so keen to talk about NRL and in Melbourne AFL, that if there is that 1% that you can latch onto and kind of focus on, it makes it look way worse than it actually is.
Yeah, the mainstream media is always out to get football fans, and one thing that goes wrong, they will blow it up in something horrible. And that's what sort of sucks about football. We're not monsters. We're not really these terrorists to football who are there to hurt everybody that enters the stadium. We're just passionate about our club. It's not just about, kicking the ball around for 90 minutes and winning a couple of trophies. For football clubs, especially to the true passionate football fans, it's about ethnicity, where we come from, who we are as a person, where it all started for us. For some of us, it's how it saved us from addictions or bad times in our lives. Football is so much more than just a 90-minute game.
Yeah, and I think it continues to tie back to so many, like in Melbourne and in areas of Sydney, there's very ethnically affiliated teams. And obviously, you understand why the FFA has tried to get away from that. But as a largely migrant nation, particularly in post-war environments, European migrants and stuff like that, if they didn't know the language, if they didn't have their own work friendship circles or whatever else, getting around a football club for many, many years, like decades and entire generations of families, was perhaps their only outlet to be around people and to be around friends. And I think that's why you see such passionate support coming through at a footballing level. I do think there are people that take it too far. I think one of the big frustrations when you look at Western Sydney outside looking in is that they do some phenomenal things like great TIFO work. Their fan engagement and participation at all their events is great. But then there's a specific section of the red and black block that doesn't wear any merchandise. They act like they're Green Street hooligans and just wear black. They're willing to fork out for shirts that say, FCK, fuck FFA, but they aren't willing to wear, the merchandise of the club itself. And that they seem to be so adamant about the use of flares and pyrotechnics. Now, I'm not against flares. I don't mind them. I think they're cool. I think they work really well. They're not used in Germany, and I think Germany at the moment is the default and standard for a lot of the active support and safe standing and things like that. The yellow wall at Dortmund is phenomenal and one of the greatest things you'll ever see. The cop at Liverpool, singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" before their games. These are some of the highlights in the game and the best examples of passionate fan support that doesn't rely on the use of pyrotechnics. So I don't understand what the obsession is with continuing to use them. I do hope they are integrated eventually into the league itself, but if you don't necessarily understand how to show passion and fervent support without the use of that, then I kind of question how devoted a fan you truly are. So that's perhaps me taking it a little bit too far and generalising for the league as a whole, but certainly it is something that has reared its head for Western Sydney in the last few years with suspended point deductions and things like that. But fingers crossed it is improving.
Yeah, I can definitely agree and understand exactly where you're coming from, and I can agree with you on that too. I personally love the flares, and I love the active support and the intimidation that comes with, example, in derbies. That's what makes the atmosphere great about football. But like you said, there's some fans that take it way too far and sort of ruin it for the rest of the club. The fines that the clubs have been given over the last couple of seasons because of the flares has been ridiculous. You damage the club so badly that, we're the only thing that you see in mainstream media. At the same time, you're taking away money from the club that could have used to, put into players or put into the youth squad or put into merchandise or put into advertisement. It's ridiculous. You're killing your club. Like you said, I can't wait for the safe standing as well as the safe active areas to be introduced, like the MLS. I love the colours at football. But when it's damaging your club and the club has personally asked you, please stop, we can't keep this up. We're trying to, hold on to the fans and make the members happy, as well as ensure that we're working on ensuring that the players are winning games. And now we've got to watch out for you guys too. It's too stressing.
Yeah, so, and I think that's what was the most farcical point of the red and black block showing up at training last year, was that they were there going and talking to professionals who devote 7 days a week, their entire lives, to winning football games. And obviously they weren't performing that well at the time, but it wasn't through lack of application. Like, think of just in your own work, in my day-to-day life, anybody listening who has, a 9-to-5 job, you take a certain sense of pride in the quality of work that you provide. So when footballers aren't winning, it can be tough for them. And I think one of the big credits for the league is that quite often players now talk about mental health and the role that defeats play in that. But to have fans arrive at training to tell players and professionals that it wasn't good enough, when those same fans, those same most ardent supporters, now have had over $100,000 of fines charged to the club and have a suspended 3-point deduction over the team. Like, imagine being a player in that environment where you've worked your ass off to try and get 3 points in the course of the season, and a fan who can't contain their behaviour or find an effective way to manage and communicate it then cost you and your team 3 points, and then that same fan turns around and tells you you aren't doing good enough because you're 3 points behind a team that's ahead of you. It's one of those things where you kind of like, the lack of application and common sense, you're making it about yourselves as the fan group rather than making it about the club, which should always be the priority for everybody that's supporting one.
Exactly, and I can agree 100% with that.
Yeah, so fingers crossed it does go. And I know I've kind of thrown some other stuff in there, and it's a bigger conversation. I'm sure it'll come up again later as a topic in the end of the year, because like Melbourne City's been fine. Melbourne Victory also has a suspended points deduction. Sydney FC have had issues with it before. It's not isolated to Western Sydney, but certainly their focus over the last 18 months has been all the more strict because of those kind of looming punishments over the top of them. But let's focus on the more positives. What is your season expectation? What do you think is a pass mark for Western Sydney in their performances this year, and where do you anticipate them finishing?
At the moment, I don't really have the best hope in me. Solely because I'm just focusing on what happened during pre-season. I'm still healing over the FFA loss.
It'll take a while. I've got a Melbourne derby tomorrow, and I'll probably cancel the podcast if we don't get a positive result in it. So I totally understand where you're coming from. I am kidding, of course. There'll be episodes continuing each week moving forward. But yeah, those results, particularly early in the season, they seem to sting quite a bit more than middle of the season or end of the road results.
Oh yeah, definitely. But looking at the squad at the moment, I like our squad, but like Marcus had mentioned, we don't have the winning mentality yet. We're not ready. And I've mentioned it also in the podcast that I did with Nicholas Ruffalo. We're not ready. We're not mentally there yet. It's going to take a couple rounds. So the first round, I'm predicting that we're not going to do very well against Perth Glory, especially because it's Tony Popovich, and he has put a side together that we've seen play in the past with the Wanderers. We've seen how unstoppable they have been with the Wanderers, now in Perth Glory. So round one's not going to go well for us. Looking at the squad now and the way that we're playing, season expectations, I don't think we're going to make it past the top 7.
Interesting. So we'll touch on the Popovich one a little bit because we haven't done the Perth recording yet. People quite easily forget that Tony Popovich himself finished 9th. He did it with Western Sydney. He's not... Well, yes, he's fantastic, and I rate him quite highly. It's going to take some time for him to... He essentially inherited a squad, and he's inherited a group that's been run very differently to the way that he will run it, and an ownership group that allows certain things. The fact that Diego Castro only does 4 weeks of preseason when everybody else does 15. The fact that Andy Keogh consistently has caused issues both on and off the field in terms of behaviour, and the fact that his uncle Cat, his car is in the name of Perth Glory, like all things like that are very strange. It'll be a massive cultural change. I don't necessarily think it will immediately click for them, and from round 1 to round 27 they'll be great. I think they will improve quite a bit with the signings they've made. I would actually probably, if you're going to ask me, pick Western Sydney this weekend to get a decent result, given that they have performed better in the FFA Cup. They have consistently played A-League friendlies as opposed to lower level NPL opposition, which Perth have done. And I think that they, in their starting 11 this weekend, with the likes of Lorente that we've spoken about, Brendan Hamill, Josh Risden, Bonavacia, Riera up top, they have enough of a core and a spine that has played together now for 12 months, whereas Perth, I expect to be a very different starting 11 to anything that we've seen from them in the last few seasons. So, yeah, have a little faith, stay positive. I believe in Western Sydney this weekend, so they'll be my pick.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's true. Tony Popovich has a sort of boot camp way of training of course, his side. You've seen at the Wanderers. It's quite crazy the stuff that he puts them through. So, yeah, when you think about that, they may be burnt out and too burnt out to perform, but we're just going to have to see.
Yeah, and let's be brutally honest, I'm proven wrong way more than I'm proven right. So any Perth fans listening can dial in next week and tell me how big an idiot I am, and we'll just add it to the list of stupid things that I've already said on this podcast. But yeah, definitely time will tell with that one. But I do think they are making steps in the right direction from last season. What is your prediction? If we take the same philosophies, apply them to the entire league, who do you think will be towards the top of the division and challenging for the title this year? And who do you think is really going to struggle and be down towards the wooden spoon area?
I think it's going to be tough for the top because a lot of the teams have actually signed great players and they're all looking quite up to scratch. But if I'm going to say the top three, I'm going to put Sydney FC up the top again because they are a class side and they're doing very well. Adelaide United and sort of stuck between Victory and Newcastle Jets.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. There's a couple of maybes. Like Sydney FC, obviously very, very talented. Really, really good squad. Probably the best team on paper and a great Australian contingent. But the kind of wild card in there is that Steve Corica, it's his first full-time management position. Obviously, he's done a really long apprenticeship under Graham Arnold and since finishing his coaching career in both youth teams and whatever else at Sydney. I do think there will be lessons that he has to learn on the pitch. You always do when you take management roles. But it'll be interesting to see if that's the difference between them finishing with, 60 points and 75 points as they did last year. For Adelaide United, I think their off-field recruitment, they've probably done the best in terms of signing the Australian talent that was out there and available. Their Australian signings have been absolutely fantastic, but their internationals still have question marks about them. I think Ken Ilso will be great, but also he's signing from a Southeast Asian league, which we're very hit and miss with. We've also seen Scandinavian players come in and be fantastic, the likes of Absalonson that they had last year, but then for everyone like that, they've also signed a Karim Matmore, who disappears after 3 months. Similar with Mirko Boland. So they're an interesting one to see how the international players integrate into that squad.
Yeah, I was caught between Newcastle and Melbourne Victory.
I think Newcastle, similar with Melbourne Victory, I think they're very top-heavy, whereas they've made phenomenal signings, like probably the best transfer window of any side in the competition this season. But their starting backline will likely be Storm Rue, Nick Ansell, George Niedermeyer, who we haven't seen yet, and Corey Brown. I don't look at that as being an elite level defensive unit just yet. They might get there, but right now, from what we know of those players, I don't think it's there. But their forward line's so good. They may still win every game 4-3 and it won't matter. And Newcastle will be interesting because Ernie Merrick, for a long time, particularly when he was at Melbourne Victory, had yo-yo seasons where he would be at the top of the division, then he'd struggle and be at the bottom of the division, then top again, then bottom. So it'll be interesting to see if he's learnt lessons there or if that's going to carry on and be the story for Newcastle this year. But across the board, as you've already noted, a lot of teams seem to be a lot stronger than they were 12 months ago, and it can only serve the league to have a higher quality of football and higher quality opposition each and every week.
Yeah, definitely.
So who do you think is going to struggle? Who do you think will be down towards the bottom of the division?
I'm looking solely at the main three, and that would be Wellington Phoenix, Central Coast, and Brisbane Roar. The reason I'm picking Brisbane Roar and Central Coast the most is even though they have signed a couple of players that have looked pretty good, and I'm sure over the couple rounds of the A-League, they may improve, they may get there. Central Coast, of course, they've signed a bunch of players as well that I'm quite happy to see on the squad, and I think it just depends. I'm a 50-50 on how they might be this season, whether they'll be at the top half of the ladder or the bottom half. But just solely going with my gut, I haven't seen anything yet, but just with my gut, Wellington Phoenix because they've struggled in the past and they haven't been able to make it through the top 7. Central Coast because of course they've had a couple other seasons where they haven't been the best and they just might struggle again this season. And Brisbane Roar because, again, they're another side that didn't do very well last season, and I'm not quite sure that they're going to be able to mould well together yet, maybe for the first half of the season. So those are the top three that'll be down the bottom this season for me.
Yeah, we spoke about pre-season results not really mattering, and Brisbane, I think, is guilty of the moment of they're undefeated in pre-season. They have been defeated in the FFA Cup, so everyone just seems to be ignoring that one. I think they're entirely reliant on how Adam Taggart performs. If he's able to get them 15 goals this year, they'll be in and around the finals conversation. If not, they won't be anywhere near it. Similar with Central Coast. They've obviously made tremendous improvements on the teams they've had over the last few years. Usain Bolt notwithstanding, we'll do a whole other Bolt episode, I think. There's that much content we could talk about for him. But if they can get Ross McCormack, who was fantastic for us despite never getting fit at Melbourne City, consistent service, they will beat some teams this year. And I think they're a smoky to get into the 6, but it depends entirely on the performances for those two sides of Adam Taggart and Ross McCormack. They will define the seasons for both teams. And Wellington's big struggle is that they've just not been able to get players to go across there and play. They've recycled a lot of talent from other clubs or that have played in the A-League before. Stephen Taylor was obviously a great signing of intent, but then they never really kicked on and did anything else with it. They were linked to the likes of Obafemi Martins, Michael Essien. If they had brought those two in, it's a whole different conversation. But I think up until yesterday, they only had 18 players. They've added another 2 from MPL structures. So they only have 20 going into round 1. And a lot of that 20 are players that they've signed in the last 2 weeks. So I do think they'll struggle as well.
Yeah, as much faith as I do have in Mark Rudan, I'm quite excited to see what he can bring to the field, because I do have a lot of hope in him as a manager, as well as a couple of the signings he has made. Like you said, it's going to take a lot of time for them. I think they might struggle just like the Wanderers did last season. It's going to be a tough season for them, but at the same time, we could be wrong. Mark Rudan could have something up his sleeve.
Yeah, and I hope he does do well, and it's great to see him getting an opportunity after cutting his teeth. Like, I think quite often, and Steve Corica is a great example in that he just stayed with Sydney FC and stayed at an A-League level. Mark Rudan, I think, took a ton of courage to drop down and be willing to take coaching positions at MPL to learn his trade. So I hope he is successful, but I think they've essentially made signings in relation to quality for where the league was 2 or 3 years ago, not necessarily where the league is today. But yeah, again, I'm proven wrong way more than I'm proven right, and we may be celebrating a Wellington Phoenix Premiership Championship double at the end of the year, and by all means, people can destroy me in the comment section below. So I'm going to get your prediction for this weekend. You have mentioned that you are a bit concerned about playing away at Perth. It is a tough place to travel to. What is your score prediction, and who do you think will be the scorers?
I think it'll be a 2-1 Perth Warriors way.
Yep. Who do you think is the most likely to score, other than your main man, the Big Bay up front?
Rolly Bonavacia. I have a gut feeling that he might be scoring one.
I like Rolly. I like him a lot. The one thing he doesn't have is goals, but he consistently scores 1 Thunderbolt of season, and he'll have 27 appearances, 1 goal, but it's a goal that we talk about in end-of-season highlight reels and stuff like that. So, yeah, big things expected for him now. He is 25. He's been around the club and the league for a good few seasons, rated as a high-quality player, but yet to be in a truly successful team. So fingers crossed he does kind of kick on a little bit. And that can start this weekend with a goal against the Glory. Thank you so much for joining me, Christina. I really enjoyed our chat. Do you have any, your relevant Twitter handles, links to the other pages and podcasts that you're a part of that you'd like to give a plug to anyone that might be listening?
If anyone's listening, just go straight to the Ladies League, guys. You'll find us on Twitter. We're a female-based journalist group, and basically we just take the piss out of football. We're serious at times. We love our game. We're quite passionate about it, but, life's too short to be serious all the time. So if you want to laugh, just head over there and, have a giggle at us.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal site. That's actually how I reached out to Christina initially to do this review. And if you have some spare coin and want to get yourself some A-League merchandise, they do offer some of the finest.
Sorry, it's some funny stuff, not the usual stuff you'd see at the typical A-League merch stores at the games, but
Yeah, and if Ken Ilso's a fan, you should be a fan as well. So please go and give them some of your support. There will be links to Christina and all her relevant social media channels in the description below. If you guys are listening on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel at InTheMixer_podcast or on SoundCloud at InTheMixer_podcast, or you can be kept up to date on A-League content throughout the course of the season and quality podcasts as they continue to get released on Twitter at InTheMixer_pod, entirely because we ran out of characters on that particular handle. But more than anything, thank you so much for listening, guys. We really do appreciate your support, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the Mixer.